here this morning. And we are very quickly coming to an end in our study in Nehemiah. I hope you have enjoyed it. Again, this will be my next to last topic on Nehemiah. And as I've been talking to you for a couple of weeks, today is going to be basically what have you gained from this study over these last 12 weeks. This will be week 12 of this study in Nehemiah. So again, I'll go ahead and kind of start with myself. One thing that I kind of wrap my hands around for the first time, I believe, is the time frame of all of this in Nehemiah, and looking at where it was in reference to where it's positioned in the Old Testament. We so often look at the Bible in chronological order, and I think that's kind of due to, we see the New Testament with Matthew being with the birth of Christ, and then we end with Revelation, which is considered the last book that was written, or the last letter that was written. And so we kind of look at the New Testament in chronological order, and we sometimes look the same way with the Old Testament, that it started with Genesis, and so therefore Malachi would be the last book, written before, Jesus was born. So that's one thing that I've really gathered more this study than I ever have, is kind of where Nehemiah is at in the story of the Old Testament and so on. So my question to you, and I've told you for the last 2 weeks, this is going to be a short class if you don't speak out, okay? So what has been kind of the big takeaway? That's kind of the key. We use that term a lot in education nowadays. What's been kind of your key takeaways in Nehemiah?
I think it started out telling me the importance of prayer.
The importance of prayer?
If you don't know anything about Nehemiah, and then all of a sudden chapter 1, verse 1 is a prayer.
Yeah.
It starts out with prayer, which tells me a lot about Nehemiah.
Okay, yeah, Nehemiah starts out with prayer. We brought that out a lot when we brought that when we first started. I remember we talked about how he was devoted to God and doing, wanting to do what God wanted him to do. What else? Yes.
If people work together with an objective, how much they can get accomplished?
Okay, if people work together with a common objective, how much can they get accomplished? That's very true. Because you look, go ahead. Yeah, he didn't give up. Yeah, he stuck with it. A lot of obstacles, at first. Well, throughout, I guess you could say. But did not give up. Very good.
This is not what I'm making the takeaway, but I was glad to see the wall and I just think it was a square or something like that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I was very pleased to find that myself. It kind of helped me get sometimes even a better picture of some of the stories, especially if you look at the kings and everything. They'll talk about going to the Kidron Valley or those, I'm not sure of whichever gate, and it's interesting. When we study Isaiah in the next month or two, one thing that really stands out to me is, Isaiah is written before Nehemiah, okay? Actually, a few hundred years before Nehemiah. And it's amazing how small Judah is when they are being accosted by the Assyrian Empire. And you think of the Assyrian Empire as basically covering from Turkey all the way, almost like a big comma or sideways comma, from going this way to, from your vantage point, to Egypt, and then this way to almost to Iraq, and then you've got Judah in the middle, which is basically Jerusalem, because Assyria gets all the strongholds except for Jerusalem, and just how small that is as they are being tried to be taken over by the Assyrian Empire. That to me, it's a very fascinating story that we'll talk about with King Hezekiah, and just how small Jerusalem is and how they are able to withstand that Assyrian onslaught that was going on. So yeah, I thought that was, and again, looking at, because I see some maps sometimes of like the Jerusalem during David's time or something like that, but I didn't really get an idea of the wall.
So, point out, they took advantage of the geography, is why it is strange shape like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're on the mountaintop.
Right, yeah.
So they added to the height of the walls by building the top of the roof.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because you kind of, sometimes you kind of, especially nowadays with modern warfare and stuff like that, you don't think of a wall being such a big, defense, but not only was there a wall, but like Paul said, geographically, yeah, you kind of have to, well, it's like when you study battlefields, for those of you that are interested in that, you take the high ground, and, if you've got a ridge, that's going to be hard to take what's on top. Well, you take Jerusalem, it was on a hill. You can even have references to that even in the Old and the New Testament about the geographical layout of Jerusalem, and then you add the walls up to it. Yeah. Yeah, you always go up to Jerusalem. You kind of wonder why that is, and that's why. Geographically, it is up. It's up on the ridge. Yes, yeah, you could. Right. You can't really tell this, but like the state capital of Tennessee, it's on an Indian mound. If you think about that when you go to Nashville next time, you'll see that there's a rise when you go toward the state capitol. It's actually on an Indian mound. It's on a rise. Jim? Yeah, I think so. All right, so we got geographically, the map. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, very much. We talked a lot about how he, you have the objective of building a wall, but then you have the workforce, and we talked a lot about the workforce, that you had to tap into that. You had to make sure they didn't get too disgruntled or too afraid. You had other obstacles they had to face too. So yeah, tapping into that resource, that the people he had to deal with. Yeah, he did a good job at that. Yes. He knew his people. Yeah. Making people feel needed is very, very important to keep that momentum going. I think we talked about momentum early on about, you get this guy showing up from, basically, a return from the exile, and he's like, hey, I'm here to build a wall. And to keep that momentum and to, like you said, knowing those strengths, as a leader, when you ask someone to do something that you know that they're either passionate about or that's their strong point, they have a better tendency to want to do that. And again, that helps them grow as not only a worker, but also developing talents to be future leaders as well. Paul.
What we're talking about there is perhaps one of the biggest challenges I think we see as elders is how can we tap into the people we have here to accomplish the things for God that we need to accomplish.
Yeah.
And we strive, we really work at, who can we work? We see something needs to be done. Who we get?
Yeah, who do you get?
Who do we get to do that?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the key takeaways also from Nehemiah. He prayed about it. Once he realized, hey, this is something God wants me to do, he did it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Too often, many of us have great ideas, and God's but then we, like, just do it.
Yeah, just do it. You're absolutely right. Yeah, Al.
What I hear a lot of people saying is Nehemiah put a plan together.
Yeah,
He had a plan.
yeah,
Noah had a plan.
right.
God was involved in that.
Mhm.
And then when things kind of went haywire, he was willing to change the plan.
Mhm. Yeah.
We talked about a plan even on Wednesday night lessons.
Mhm.
God
Yeah.
gave us a plan, follow the
Yeah,
plan.
follow the plan. Yeah, but yeah, tapping into those resources and just with Nehemiah, you get those enemies that come in. You've got everything you need. You've got the leadership. You're devoted to what God wants you to do. You've got the individuals. You got the momentum, but you're still going to have those enemies that keep coming in, trying to halt your progress. Yeah. Right.
When they read the law, the effect of reading what was proclamations from God,
Mm-hmm.
what we learned that the effect that it had for them might have the same effect if we read it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another, so often Nehemiah, and this is kind of something I learned too, is we kind of think of Nehemiah, he built the wall. But as Maurice brought, he had them read the law, which we talked about. Some of the people there may have never heard the law before, and just the impact that it had on them, and they celebrated that. They were overjoyed with being able to have access to the Word of God again. Yeah, absolutely. Because as we say, hindsight's 20/20. How can you be so forgetful? And even in this short book that we have with Nehemiah, we see that they forgot some of the things, because Nehemiah, when he leaves and he comes back, he has to kind of set things right again. You can't be doing that. But yeah, just being so overjoyed with hearing that word of the law. So, yeah.
There were so many that had never heard, that were born in captivity.
Yep.
Were now old
Mm-hmm.
and had never heard the word.
Right.
And it's not something that automatically happens.
Mm-hmm.
We're not inherently born with the word of God in our
Right.
head.
Right. Yeah. Another, and again, this is kind of speculative on just through commentators, but some have suggested that those that were born in captivity, they basically knew the Chaldean language, and so when they read the law with the Hebrew language, they actually had to interpret that into. I mean, they couldn't even read the law, like be literate enough to read the law, because all they knew were Chaldean language. They didn't know the Hebrew language. It'd be like, you not knowing, you have a Spanish Bible presented to you for the first time, and you're just looking at it. I mean, unless you know Spanish, you're not going to know what the book says. So some have suggested some of the wording in Nehemiah that they actually had to interpret it so that people that didn't even know the Hebrew language would be able to understand the law of God. Yeah. I do not know how old he was during all of this, or like when he came back. And I don't know how long he was gone in those last few chapters. Now, the journey itself is quite long. Why am I?
It tells us there's 12 years
There's, right.
in between, but how long did he stay when he was gone?
The second time.
How long did he stay? It doesn't say.
It does not say that. Yeah, it doesn't. Like, basically going into chapter 13, as we did a couple weeks ago, as he is gone for a while. I mean, remember, he returns because the king, when he sent him in chapter 1 or 2, say, well, when are you going to come back? And so after 12 years, he went back. So when he came back to Jerusalem, we don't really know I don't know how many years those are. I don't. Like I said, it is a long journey between basically Shushan, 'cause one map has that they could do a kind of along the river and then come back down to Jerusalem. Some have a quicker route that goes a little bit straighter, but you are going through an extensive desert region, so that wasn't necessarily depending on who you're kind of traveling with, that may not be the best route to have gone. But yeah, several hundreds of miles between those 2 points. So yeah, reading of the law, that was a pretty impactful chapter for me. It's like, and now we've built a wall, we're defending the city. The temple has been rebuilt already through Ezra. Again, I encourage you, if Nehemiah has interested you, Ezra would be another interesting book. And some suggest that even Esther is somewhere in that 100 years of history there. So these 3 books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, are very similar in time frame, and they're quick reads too. And so other interesting stories in those books as well. But yeah, rededication of the law was a pretty impactful chapter in this story. What else? Yes?
I am amazed by his level of conviction. And I can't help but think it's the Holy Spirit that convicted him in chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
And that he followed through with his conviction.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, there's so many times I've had a good idea, or I need to go do, or I need to, only for me to get distracted.
Mm-hmm.
His resolve to carry through his conviction,
Mm-hmm.
I think is a great testament for us.
Yeah, very much so. That, because yeah, you can start something, but to stay, committed to that and have that conviction with all the obstacles that he did have to face is a very powerful story as well. It's similar. It's you look at how the human race is. You've got, as Paul was mentioning, you find those that have that's their strength sets to do this, but then it's, I don't know if I want to do it. So then it's like, well, just do it. Well, then you start it, and then it's like, okay, well, you got to keep going. So it's all these obstacles that we have to face today, and how, you look at Nehemiah, and he just overcame one obstacle after obstacle. Yes, Jim? Huh? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. We've talked about blue laws, old blue laws like that. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was, and I think Jesus brought that out, is, we can take things way to the extreme, and he's basically saying, well, I think it was, if you've got a donkey that falls into a pit, you're gonna get it out, because it's a necessity. It's back then it was a necessity. So I think what so fascinates me with that story, as well as so many other stories about Jesus and the Pharisees and the law, is that it's what kind of heart do you have towards God, and I'll again kind of going back to Isaiah. I hate that I feel like y'all aren't going to be interested in Isaiah because I keep bringing it up in Nehemiah. But there's a part of Isaiah where God says, "I'm tired of your sacrifices. I'm tired of you doing these sacrifices that you're supposed to be doing, because your heart's far from me. You're just checking it off. It's like, okay, it's 10 o'clock. I'm going to bed. I guess I better pray before I go to bed. It's just one of those. Okay, I've checked it off, so I'm done good today. And kind of like the Sabbath day, they're saying, well, you can't heal this man's hand on the Sabbath day because you're not supposed to do work. Well, why would you not do something that's right and good just because it's a certain day of the week? And so, anyway, yeah, the heart is something that, it's funny, we talk about it so much in the New Testament, but as I've studied Isaiah, that's been one of the key themes of that particular book too, is children of Israel, your heart's not right, and God's had enough of it. It's kind of what it is. Y'all are doing good. It's 25 after. Y'all been going for 25 minutes. So yeah, I'm glad y'all are, either y'all have learned it or it's one of those, well, I've already knew this, but I'm glad you're speaking out and telling me these things. No, there's others that don't, and again, there's others that believe that Sunday is not the legitimate day to worship either. And and Nehemiah, he had, there were some enemies that he had that was trying to divert or persuade him to go other directions. And again, he had to stay devoted to God and to be convicted in that and what he was doing. We had mentioned something about, the gentleman that had he had an office at the temple instead of it being a storehouse so that the Levites could perform, their duties. I mean, there's so often that we lose focus on what the true intention is of how we are to worship God. We get regimented, I guess we can say, from time to time. Setting our habits, that's a good point. He did. He showed a lot of courage. Right, yeah. Yeah, even when they were basically trying to take his life. I mean, they were trying their best to just get rid of him. If we can get rid of the leader, then hopefully this wall project will fade away. But again, being devoted to God. Which, what's interesting in that story is they try to trick him with the Word of God, basically saying, why don't you go hide in the temple, and that way you'll kind of be protected. And of course, Nehemiah, had that resolve of, well, but I was sent here to help build this wall. I'm not going to go hide away somewhere, even if it is the dwelling place of God. God sent me here to help build this wall, so I'm not going to go hide out during all this. Yeah, very, very courageous person. And again, we'll talk a little bit about this next week too, how to apply Nehemiah to us today. But that is one of the things that we have to be today. We have to be courageous, which again kind of connects to the things we're talking about on Wednesday nights with being more a missional church, is sometimes we have to be courageous. We have to go beyond our comfort zone, beyond some of our hesitancies. There was a guy he passed away during COVID. His name was Phil Valentine. He did talk radio out of Nashville, but one of his famous phrases on the talk show was, does that make you feel uncomfortable? And basically, if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then you don't need to do it. But he was kind of being sarcastic in that, that's the time when you've got to kind of stand up and do what's right, even though it may make you or other people feel uncomfortable.
I thought about chapters 1 and 2.
Uh-huh.
What kind of character is better described than when Nehemiah was given permission to leave captivity
Mm-hmm.
to go into a country that had been taken by the same people?
Mm-hmm.
Let's kind of say more about Nehemiah and his character than anything, because I can't imagine a king, unless God's hand was working, will let some guy leave with his cupbearer and run off to another country and rebuild the fortress that they destroyed.
Yeah. it is a testament to his character. And the point that Maurice is making is Nehemiah was a cupbearer, but he was a slave. I mean, he is probably born into exile, I would think. Otherwise he'd be like 90 years old or something, so probably, but grew up to the point where the king trusted him, as a cupbearer, that he wouldn't help aid in poisoning him. But then ask, basically saying, my heritage is destroyed. Could I go back and rebuild it? And again, the king of Persia had taken over Babylon, and Babylon was the one that just totally destroyed Jerusalem. And so this king lets Nehemiah, his trusted cupbearer, go back to rebuild this city. It is a true testament to the kind of person Nehemiah was. I liken it to Joseph, honestly. The character of Joseph in the Old Testament, where, he had been basically forsaken by his family, been lied about, was a prisoner, but yet God was still with him throughout this whole situation and all the obstacles he faced. Nehemiah, to me, I liken them a lot to each other.
We see that also in Daniel.
Daniel, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Those people that
Yes.
of Jewish faith, they went in a foreign country against the will.
Mm-hmm.
But if they kept their faith, it's interesting how they rose to the top.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, providence.
Providence. Yep. Daniel, for example, if you look at Daniel, no matter who the king was, and he went through several of them, both Babylon and Persian, he will rise to the occasion to where he pretty much is overseeing a large portion of the empire, whether it be Babylonian or Persian. I remember when I taught world history, I can't remember which school I was at, but I remember in studying world history, it referred to, I think it was Cyrus, and it said Cyrus the Great Organizer. And I couldn't help but think, yeah, Cyrus is given credit for all this in world history, but just how much of that truly was because of people like Daniel that was actually organizing this thing. But yeah, Daniel's another good example of, again, going into that foreign country, which again, I just showed you this graphic, I think my first or second week doing this, where it had the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah and the prophets. And you'll notice one thing that's interesting is Israel will be taken, the northern kingdom, they are taken by Assyria, and you will have Judah will be taken by Babylon. Well, of course, that's where Daniel kind of comes into play. And so Daniel happens before Nehemiah. And so you can kind of, when you start linking all these prophecies together about, Isaiah hundreds of years before, we'll talk about this remnant that's going to come back. And of course, Nehemiah is part of that remnant that comes back. And Daniel's in the middle of all that. And Daniel's telling you about the Babylonian Empire and the statue, and the next is going to be, Persia, or what will eventually be Persia, and so on, and how all that all comes together. Very, very fascinating. Again, next week I've told you that I want to briefly touch on what happens after Nehemiah, which really, since you mentioned Daniel, will take us back to that statue, the famous statue that Daniel sees. I'll kind of give you a little bit of world history into what happens after Nehemiah and the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and then, of course, the time that Jesus is born. Jerusalem still there, but it's the Romans that are in charge. And so there's a couple of things that happen during all that. In fact, Isaiah will even touch on that a little bit as well. All right. Yes.
I'll go back to Faith's question about how old he was.
Uh-huh.
I was waiting for AI, but it says 60 to 70
Okay.
years old, and he's supposed to be between 20.
Okay.
And that's from a biblical side.
Yeah. And I could see that. I mean, because again, I think he was born in captivity. Babylonian Empire lasted 70 years. So it would be sometime after, yeah, I could see that. Absolutely. 20 to 30 years. Yes.
Evidently was taught, but what got me wondering about it was, and just starting to read the chapter again,
Mhm.
that Hananiah, one
Mhm.
of my brethren, came from Judah.
Mhm.
Otherwise, they must have had people go back and forth somewhat.
This Hananiah probably went back with Ezra. See, Nehemiah was the last. There was three when. Oh my goodness, Artaxerxes, is that his name? Yeah. When he became king, I think I'm right. I think it was him. There were basically when Persia took over, they said those are in exile. You can go back if you want to, which again, from my understanding, was no kingdom had ever done that before, because to keep your kingdom together, you basically suppress them by saying, okay, this community over here, y'all gonna move over there, and you're gonna have to kind of survive. So instead of worrying about rebelling against me, the king, y'all just gonna have to fend for yourself. And I'm gonna take this group, and I'm gonna take you over here. And that the Assyrians were known for that. Well, Babylon was like, y'all go back. Paul.
Let's look at the economics of it for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Because Babylon figured out, hey, if you're over there making money, you're paying me taxes.
Mm-hmm.
If nothing's happening over there and I've got you captured here,
Mm-hmm.
you're just costing me money.
Right.
So God used that mindset of the Persians to
Mm-hmm.
say, okay, can I go back? Yes, you can go back, because they still had control and they were still paying taxes.
Yep. So it's my understanding there were three different groups that went back. Ezra led a group. I think Zerubbabel, but they could be together. I'm not for sure. But from my understanding, Hananiah had went before, and then he came back to Shushan or wherever. And so that's why Nehemiah was like, well, hey, what's going on? And well, the wall's still down. Right. Yeah. So they think he was part of one of the first couple of groups that went back, like Ezra and those that kind of helped rebuild the temple, but the wall still was down. And so he came back, and he said the wall's still down. You know, and again, you can have this great temple, but you're still vulnerable to your enemies, you know, because the wall's not there. So yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting in looking at that. The Old Testament up until really from the conquest of Canaan, you know, you had, you know, Joshua, you are to destroy these nations, and they did not do it. And then when, you know, Matthew studied, when Matthew led a discussion on Judges, you know, that was another thing that was brought out is that they were marrying outside of the Jewish nation, and those pagan gods and that influence of them following their pagan gods influenced Israel. And of course, if you study the kings of Israel, you'll know that Baal and you know, all those, just there was a constant battle between false gods. And one thing that's interesting, and Matthew brought this out to me, and we were talking one day, after Nehemiah, you don't see the idol worship from the Jews anymore. You know, as far as that worshiping false gods, you don't really see that after they come back from Persia. You know, if you study Isaiah, you know, it's all this false gods and all this, and not relying on God and not trusting in God. But after that destruction of Jerusalem, and when the remnant comes back, you don't see that idol worship anymore. Okay, and I had not thought of that before, but yeah, that's another thing that. And when you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and when you look at the Gospels, you don't necessarily see idol worship. Now, they'll use the Roman Caesar, sorry. Oh, man. Sorry. Sorry, now I'm thinking of the salad. I'm sorry. Oh, man. Whew. I only had 6 minutes, and I lost it. 6 minutes left. So you know they'll look at the Roman Caesar. You know they'll use that sometimes. You know, as their king or whatever. But you can kind of see that the false gods and all that's not really there. All right. So we got 4 minutes. Al.
I think another important thing to remember is God's hand is in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I remember reading somewhere about the book of Esther. Maybe it shouldn't have been in the Bible at all,
Right.
because God's not even mentioned.
Right. God's not
When
mentioned.
you read the story,
Yep.
it's kind of like this: God's hand is all through Esther
Right.
and Nehemiah.
Right.
And just because they're not mentioned 1,000 times, but when you look at all what could have happened,
Mm-hmm.
God prevails through all of that.
Right.
In both.
Right, you're exactly right. Going back to providence, what Paul said, yeah. Yeah, because I've heard that before. You know, well, Esther shouldn't be in the Bible because it doesn't even mention God. It's all through it. It's all through it. I mean, it is one of those. I mean, Esther is one of those. Now, it's probably been made into a movie, but I mean, it has so many plot twists and things like. I mean, it's almost like it's you would see it in a movie format. I mean, it's just. You think you know who the bad person is, or you know, and there's no hope for this group of people. It's a fascinating story. It is a fascinating story. It's one of those where if you've got a few minutes, if you don't feel like reading it, get the Bible app that's you can download from our bulletin and have it read to you. I think it may be a 20-minute read. Like I tell Caden, 2 Spidey episodes, you know, something like that. It's not very long, not very long at all.
We ought to all go back to chapter 2, verse 4,
Mm-hmm.
and see what started this whole thing. So I prayed to the God of heaven.
Yeah.
That's a powerful, this whole accomplishment of rebuilding Jerusalem
Mm-hmm.
started when he prayed to God.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much so. Very, very much so. It's interesting. You've brought out 2 big points here. The last one, he prayed to God, to the joy that was brought forth when the Word of God or the law of God was presented. Very, very two very, very solid points.
Makes you wonder if Ezra, had he not thought about that before, or he had attempted to read and it didn't do any good, or makes you wonder. It seems like
Right.
he built the temple, which is a great success.
Mm-hmm.
But he was sent there initially to revitalize their faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But other things didn't happen until Nehemiah.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of get back to our conversation about leadership.
Right.
Ezra was a holy man.
Mm-hmm.
But things didn't really happen on a big scale until Nehemiah showed up.
Right. You're absolutely
Them
right.
working together. We have a thing in this country about religion, politics,
Mm-hmm.
state, and church.
Right.
It seemed to work out pretty well.
Right. It did.
You had 2 godly men. One of them turned out to be a leader and a politician of sorts.
Right.
Things done. The other one was a godly man in scriptures and read the Bible and talked about all the spiritual things.
Right.
But they worked well together.
Yeah, that's a very good point too, especially in today's society of both being godly men, but one's focus was more on the administrative, you could say the political system side of things, the other being more the spiritual side of growth and so on. So yeah, but they work very, very well together. Again, as Al was saying, the success didn't necessarily come through Ezra until Nehemiah got there, and that's when the progress happened. All right, we made it through it, y'all. Y'all did a great job. All right, next week, we will look at kind of a practical sense. How can I use Nehemiah as a means of helping me grow stronger as a Christian in 2025? Also, I do want to look at kind of what really fascinates me about Nehemiah. This is kind of the ending of the biblical Jewish history that we have until Gabriel comes to Zacharias with John the Baptist. So I want to give you a little bit of some world history between those 2 points. Again, not going to make this a world history class. I do want to look at it more biblically. But I do want to give you kind of an idea of these 400 years of silence that we oftentimes have heard about. It's really from Nehemiah kind of gets Jerusalem, and through Ezra, they kind of get Jerusalem going. And then we're going to have about 400 years before we have the Messiah coming. We'll talk about all that next week. Thank y'all so much. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you. How about that, man? I'm gonna sit over there.